The Immaterium is a mirror. It reflects the darkest passions of sentient life: rage, decay, excess, and scheming. We believed the great game was played by four alone. We were wrong. Across the veil of reality, where the Astronomicon's light dares not tread, a new fracture has appeared. It is not the burning, chaotic energy of the warp, but something colder, a dimension of ash and rotting vines, of silence and calculated malice, a realm where time does not flow, but ticks toward an inevitable end. An entity has breached the sanctum. He does not seek to serve the Chaos Gods. He does not seek to destroy them. He seeks to replace them. From the depths of a forgotten nightmare, the predator known as Henry Creel, the Lich, the sorcerer, Vecna, has arrived. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the laughter of the dark gods has ceased.
Servitor Overseer 99 Delta did not feel fear. Its amygdala had been cauterized 3 decades ago, replaced by a rusted logic engine that processed only quotas and compliance. Yet, as its mono-wheel tread ground through the sludge of Hive City Golgotha's lower sump, its threat assessment subroutines were screaming in binary panic. The air here usually tasted of recycled promethium and the copper tang of spilled blood, the standard olfactory signature of the Underhive. But tonight, the air was cold, an unnatural biting chill that frosted the optical lenses of 99 Delta's sensory array. The ambient noise of the manufactorums, a constant thrumming heartbeat of the Emperor's industry, had been swallowed by a suffocating silence. In that silence, a sound manifested. It did not register on the decibel sensors. It bypassed the auditory receptors entirely, vibrating directly within the wet meat of the servitor's remaining organic brainstem. A chime, solemn, heavy, like a grandfather clock tolling the death of a king. 1. The counter ticked up. 99 Delta paused, its servo arm twitching involuntarily. The logic engine returned a null error. There were no clocks in the sump. Time here was measured only in shifts and death. The Overseer pushed deeper into Sector 7G, its lumencaster cutting a cone of yellow light through the darkness. That was when the particulates began to fall. At first, the logic engine classified it as industrial ash, the omnipresent snow of the hive world. But as the flakes landed on the servitor's chassis, they did not crumble. They writhed. Deep crimson spores, glowing with a faint malevolent bioluminescence, drifted down from the rusted ventilation shafts above. The spores were thick, cloying, weaving together in the air like microscopic spiders spinning a web. Where they touched the damp metal walls of the tunnel, corrosion accelerated instantly, not the orange rust of oxidation, but a black, creeping rot that looked like necrotic flesh spreading over steel. The temperature plummeted further. The condensation on the pipes froze into jagged icicles that looked suspiciously like teeth. 99 Delta's thermal sensors began to fail, blinded by the sheer cold radiating from the very air itself. This was not the chaotic mutation of the warp. This was something sterile, predatory, and ancient. The hive was not just decaying, it was being terraformed. Scanning for the source of the biocontaminant, 99 Delta rolled into a maintenance junction traditionally held by the Iron Skulls, a low-level gang of stim-addicted laborers. The servitor prepared its heavy bolter for suppression duty, but the weapon remained cold. The Iron Skulls were already dead. They were not scattered in the chaotic posture of a gang war, nor were they butchered by the precise blades of the Drukhari. The scene defied all ballistic analysis. 5 grown men, their bodies augmented with crude muscle grafts, were suspended in the air, entangled in a thicket of fleshy, dark red vines that had erupted from the floor gratings. Their limbs were snapped at impossible angles, bones protruding through skin like broken white branches.
Their jaws were unhinged, frozen in silent screams, and their eyes were simply gone, seemingly sucked inward into the skull. The logic engine frantically cycled through the Imperial Guard's Tacticum Mortis, searching for a weapon capable of such specific atrocity. Bolter? No. Chainsword? No. Plasma burns? Negative. The cause of death was listed simply as structural collapse of the skeletal system via external telekinetic pressure. Movement detected. 99 Delta swiveled its torso, the servos whining in protest against the supernatural chill. In the center of the junction, hovering 3 meters above the ground, was a lone figure. It was a young sump worker, a boy of no more than 10 Terran standard years, wearing the gray rags of the indentured. He was not held up by wires or vines. He floated in defiance of gravity, his body stiff as a board, arms pinned to his sides. His head was tilted back, staring blindly at the ceiling where the red spores were thickest. 99 Delta initiated the standard interrogation protocol. Citizen, identify. Cessation of levitation is mandatory. The boy did not respond. Instead, the air around him began to warp, the light bending as if passing through a heat haze. Blood began to trickle from the boy's nose, dark and thick, defying gravity to flow upward into the darkness. The servitor's audio receptors picked up a low-frequency hum emanating from the child, a sound that translated into a psychic scream of such intensity that it cracked the lens of the servitor's primary optic. The boy's lips moved, syncing with the phantom clock that tolled in the servitor's mind. 4. The reality behind the floating child tore open. It did not swirl with the kaleidoscopic madness of the Immaterium. There were no demons gibbering promises of power. This rift was a wound, a vertical slit in the fabric of the Materium, peeling back like infected skin to reveal a dimension of absolute horror. Through the rift, 99 Delta saw a reflection of the Hive City, but it was a ruined skeletal echo. The sky in that other place was a roiling storm of red lightning and black clouds. Massive spider-like silhouettes stalked the horizon of that mirror world. From the rift, a presence emerged, not a physical body, but a psychic pressure so vast it felt like the weight of a titan. The logic engine spiked to 100% capacity, trying to process the impossible data. Target identified, anomaly, threat level, extremis, classification, anathema. The red vines shot out from the rift, wrapping around the servitor's chassis, crushing plasteel and ceramic with the ease of crushing an eggshell. As its systems went dark, 99 Delta transmitted one final corrupted packet of data to the upper spire, an image of the rift and a single audio file of a clock striking midnight. Then the screen went black.
Interrogator Kalen of the Ordo Hereticus adjusted the collar of his storm coat, the leather creaking in the suffocating silence of Hab-Block Tertius. He had walked the slaughter grounds of Khornite cults where blood coated the walls like paint, and he had smelled the cloying perfume of Slaaneshi dens. He knew the touch of the archenemy, but this was sterile. The Arbite's precinct had not been stormed, it had been dismantled from the inside. Kalen stepped over the barricades, his rosette gleaming faintly in the strobe of a failing lumen strip. Around him lay the precinct's defenders, hardened enforcers clad in carapace armor, men and women trained to hold the line against riots and mutants. They lay in concentric circles, facing inward, weapons unfired. There were no marks of bolt shells or lass burns. Instead, they looked as if they had been crumpled by a giant, invisible hand. Their helmets were crushed inward, visors shattered, yet the most disturbing detail was the expression frozen on the faces beneath, not the rage of combat, but the abject, weeping terror of children waking from a nightmare. The air smelled of ozone and wet earth, a graveyard scent that had no place in a hive city of plasteel and iron. "Readings are impossible, my lord,"
muttered the acolyte at Kaelin's side, tapping frantically at a rusted auspex scanner. "The local warp resonance is 0. It's flat, no demonic signatures, but the thermal temperature is 20 degrees below 0. Kaelin ignored him, drawn to a whimpering sound echoing from the holding cells. He pushed open a blast door, the metal groaning as if in pain. Inside, huddled in the corner of a cell meant for the worst recidivists, was Proctor Majoris Harlan. The man was a veteran of the ash wastes, a brute of a man with scars that told of 100 knife fights. Now he was rocking back and forth, clawing at his own eyes. "The clock," Harlan whispered, his voice a ragged rasp. "Make it stop. The ticking. It's so loud." Kaelin knelt, placing a gloved hand on the man's shoulder, invoking the rite of calm. "Look at me, Proctor. Who did this? Was it the witch, the Xenos?" Harlan looked up, revealing sockets that were wet and empty, the eyes seemingly dissolved. "Not a witch," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. A spider that walks like a man. He eats the memories. He wants the Emperor." Kaelin stiffened. The mention of the master of mankind in such a context was blasphemy, but the psychic weight in the room suddenly multiplied. The shadows in the cell seemed to elongate, detaching themselves from the walls. Harlan's rocking stopped abruptly. His body went rigid, heels lifting off the floor as an unseen force hoisted him into the air. "He is here," Harlan said, but the voice that emerged from his throat was not the gruff baritone of an enforcer. It was deep, cultured, and dripping with an ancient, cold malice. "You are looking for demons, little Inquisitor. You look for fire and rage. You possess such a limited understanding of power." Kaelin drew his bolt pistol, the weapon feeling heavy and useless in his grip. He tried to speak the litanies of protection, but his tongue felt thick, paralyzed. The room began to dissolve, the metal walls peeling away like burnt paper to reveal a storm-tossed sky of crimson clouds. The transition was instantaneous. Kaelin was no longer in the hive. He stood on a floating island of rock, drifting in a void of red lightning and swirling ash. But this was not the random madness of the warp. It was a reconstruction. Before him stood a twisted mockery of the Imperial Palace Eternity Gate, but where the Emperor's palace was gold and light, this structure was made of rotting biological matter, black veins pulsing over gray stone, covered in sludge and slime. It was a palace of decay, but perfectly ordered. A grand clock tower, impossibly tall, loomed over the structure, its hands frozen moments before midnight. The silence here was absolute, heavier than the grave. Kaelin realized with a jolt of horror that he was inside a mind so vast and disciplined that it could reconstruct reality within itself. He was not the hunter here. He was a microbe under a microscope. "You built a corpse empire upon a lie," the voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. From the shadows of the ruined gate, he stepped forward. The entity was humanoid, but skinless. Raw, wet muscle glistened in the red light, dark veins tracing patterns across a skull-like visage. One hand was oversized, tipped with long, predatory talons. Vecna did not walk, he glided, the ash parting around him. He stopped 10 paces from Kaelin, tilting his head with scientific curiosity. "Your chaos gods are unruly children. They feed on emotion, messy, chaotic, unpredictable. I do not want your emotions. I want your order. I want your silence." Vecna raised a hand, and Kaelin felt a pressure in his skull, as if a drill were boring into his frontal lobe. "I will take this world, and then I will break your golden throne just to see what crawls out." Kaelin screamed as the vision shattered, waking up on the floor of the cell, just in time to see Proctor Harlan's body twist and snap like a dry twig, collapsing into a heap of wet meat. The clock in Kaelin's head chimed.
2.
Magos Biologus Varric of the Adeptus Mechanicus did not trust his optical sensors. He adjusted the focal length of his primary augmetic eye, zooming in on the vast assembly line of Manufactorum 9. Usually, this cathedral of industry sang with the holy din of stamping presses and the chanting of tech thralls. Now it was silent, save for the wet tearing sound of growth. The massive cogwheel mechanisms consecrated in the name of the Omnicia were choked. Thick, ropey tendrils of dark matter, neither plant nor fungus, but something far more parasitic, had wrapped around the pistons and gears. Varric extended a mechadendrite, a metallic tentacle tipped with a surgical scalpel, to take a sample. As the blade sliced into the vine, it did not leak sap, it bled. A dark, viscous ichor hissed as it touched the blessed metal of his instrument. Varric's internal cogitator spun wildly. The biological matter was not just obstructing the machine, it was interfacing with it. The vines had burrowed into the power conduits, bypassing the insulations to feed directly on the motive force of the generator. The logic was terrifyingly efficient. This organism viewed the machine not as an enemy, but as a host body to be worn. Magos, chattered Scaterius Alpha 6, his voice a synthesized rasp of static. The neosphere is polluted. The machine spirits are screaming. Varric connected his mind to the local data cloud, expecting to see the golden streams of binary code that governed the factory. Instead, he was met with a wall of gray static. Through the data haze, he saw the truth of the corruption. The industrial servitors, mind-wiped cyborgs hardwired into the walls, were twitching in unison. The red vines on the floor surged upward, stitching the wounds of the beasts back together in seconds. It was regeneration on a cellular level that defied entropy. A demogorgon lunged at Alpha 6, its petal jaws clamping over the soldier's helmet. Metal crunched, and the Scaterius went limp, his connection to Varric's data tether severed instantly. The temperature in the Manufactorum dropped to absolute zero, freezing the oil in Varric's joints. The atmospheric scrubbers groaned and imploded as an invisible force crushed them. From the pile of broken machinery and dismembered Scateri, a new form began to rise. It was not a creature of flesh, but a construct of telekinesis. Scrap metal, severed limbs, and the pulsing red vines swirled together in a violent cyclone, fusing into a towering avatar. It stood 4 meters tall, a mockery of a Space Marine dreadnought built from the refuse of the battlefield. The entity had no eyes, only a central mass of writhing vines where a cockpit should be. Varric felt the pressure on his mind. The mind flare was here. It did not speak in Gothic or binary, it spoke in the language of domination. The surviving Scateri stopped firing. They turned, their red ocular lenses flickering out and reigniting at a cold, dead blue. The telekinetic avatar raised a hand made of twisted eye-beams, and Varric felt his own mechadendrites turn against him, wrapping around his throat. Illogical, Varric gargled, his voxcaster failing as the pressure crushed his trachea. The avatar of scrap stepped forward, the floor plates buckling under its unnatural weight. The blue-eyed Scateri marched in perfect synchronization behind it, a new army forged in the silence of the void. Varric's final vision was not of the Omnicia's light, but of the cold, intricate perfection of Vecna's design. This entity did not want to destroy the technology of Mars, he wanted to perfect it. He stripped the machine of its superstition and replaced it with cold purpose. As Varric's consciousness faded, his neural drive was uploaded not to the great cloud of the Mechanicus, but into the hive mind of the Predator. He became part of the web, and in the darkness of the data stream, he heard the clock chime for the 3rd time. 3. The Manufactorum belonged to the spider now.
High atop the Spire of Whispers, piercing the smog-choked stratosphere of Golgotha Prime, Astropath Prime Yuvon sat enthroned in a cradle of sensory deprivation fluids. He was a withered husk of a man, blind since birth, his eyes stitched shut with sacred silver thread to better see the currents of the Empyrean. Around him, 50 lesser astropaths were hardwired into the choir banks, their minds linked in a psychic gestalt. They were screaming, not with their throats, those had long since atrophied from disuse, but with their souls. The planet was dying. The call for aid had to reach Holy Terra. "The Emperor protects," Yuvon chanted mentally, guiding the choir's collective will into a spear of golden light, aimed to pierce the warp storm encircling the system. Usually the warp was a roaring ocean of predators, a cacophony of demonic laughter and emotional debris. But today, the ocean was gone. In its place was a wall, a barrier of gray, impenetrable fog that did not swirl or churn, but hung static and cold, absorbing the psychic screams of the dying world like a sponge soaking up blood. "Push!" Yuvon commanded telepathically, feeling the strain fracture the minds of the weaker choir members. 3 of the acolytes in the lower ring convulsed, blood spurting from their ears as their brains boiled within their skulls. Yet the signal did not break through. Instead, the fog pushed back. It wasn't a brute force attack like the rage of Khorne, nor the seductive whisper of Slaanesh. It was an invasion of privacy. A foreign consciousness slid into the astropathic network, slippery, cold, and immensely arrogant. It felt like a spider crawling across the exposed surface of a brain. Yuvon realized with a jolt of terror that the barrier wasn't blocking them, it was listening to them. It was studying the frequency of their devotion, analyzing the modulation of their prayers. The entity was learning the encryption keys of the Imperium's psychic communications. Then came the sound. It manifested inside the Gestalt link, drowning out the golden hum of the Astronomicon. A clock, ticking, tick-tock, tick-tock. It was deafening in the psychic silence. With each beat, a member of the choir died. They didn't explode in warp fire, they simply turned gray. Their skin desaturated, their life force drained away instantly, leaving behind husks that crumbled into black ash within their fluid tanks. Yuvon tried to sever the link, to cut the cord before the contagion reached him, but he was held fast. "I see you," a voice whispered. Not from the warp, but from the spaces between the seconds. "I see your golden light. It is blinding. It is inefficient." The presence was vast, a mind that had spent eons in isolation, honing its will into a razor. Vecna was not just invading a planet, he was using the astropaths as a ladder, climbing the psychic beam back towards the source, towards Terra. The vision of the Astronomicon, the guiding beacon of the Emperor, flickered in Yuvon's mind. For a terrifying second, the golden flame was obscured by a silhouette, a giant, spindly hand reaching out to snuff the candle. Yuvon felt his own soul beginning to crack. The 4 chimes rang out, a psychic death knell that shattered the stained glass windows of the spire. 4. The connection to the Imperium was severed. The light of the Emperor was replaced by the dim red glow of a dying star. Yuvon's physical body began to levitate in his tank, the fluid turning black around him. He realized the message they had sent had been rewritten. They had not called for help. They had sent an invitation. The final thought that crossed his mind before his ego dissolved was a memory of a grandfather clock in a hallway he had never visited, and a door opening to a world of endless night. Deep within the crystal labyrinth of the warp, far from the material plane, the great ocean rippled. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the architect of fate, paused in his eternal scheming. A singular eye, burning with the light of 1,000 galaxies, blinked. The great game, the eternal war between the chaos gods, was predicated on the flow of emotion. But this new ripple was devoid of passion. It was stagnant, yet aggressive. It was an anomaly, a parasite from a dimension that should not exist. Around the crystal throne, blue horrors, lesser demons of Tzeentch, stopped their gibbering and began to scream, their forms twisting as if caught in a strong wind. The architect did not feel fear, for fear was a mortal constraint, but he felt intrigue and jealousy. Someone else was manipulating the strands of fate, snapping them with a crude telekinetic precision that offended the gods' intricate sensibilities. Tzeentch reached out a talon, weaving a spell of unmaking, and whispered a command to his 1,000 sons. The board had changed. A new player had sat down, and he had not asked for permission.
Tank Commander Jackson of the Cadian 412th Armored Regiment slammed his fist against the flickering auspex screen of his Leman Russ Vanquisher, the Emperor's Retribution. The battlefield outside was a churning sea of mud and ash, illuminated only by the strobe light flashes of distant artillery. "Target lock lost," the gunner screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "I can't get a fix, sir. The cogitator keeps reading the enemy as weather." Jackson peered through the periscope. What he saw defied every tactical manual in the Astra Militarum's library. They were not facing a tide of orcs or a legion of traitor marines. They were facing a storm that walked. Looming over the ruined skyline of Hive Secundus was a colossal entity, a mind flare composed of swirling black smoke, debris, and red lightning. It stood distinct from the warp. It felt colder, sharper. The ground beneath the treads of the tank battalion wasn't just muddy, it was pulsing. The soil had turned into a lattice of black vines that grabbed at the tracks, slowing the advance of the steel column. The air inside the tank smelled of recycled sweat and the bitter copper taste of fear. "All units, fire at will. Bring that shadow down," Jackson roared into the Voxcaster. The command was met with the thunderous roar of 100 battle cannons. The night lit up as high-explosive shells and laser cannon beams tore through the air, converging on the massive smoke-wreathed entity. The impacts should have leveled a titan. Instead, the smoke simply swirled around the explosions. The entity didn't even flinch. It raised a multi-limbed hand, and the smoke solidified into a telekinetic barrier. The shells detonated mid-air, harmlessly. Then the entity struck back. It didn't fire a weapon. It simply pushed. A wave of invisible force, rippling with red energy, slammed into the vanguard of the tank column. The lead Baneblade, a fortress on tracks, was lifted into the air like a toy. It hovered for a terrifying second, its engines screaming against gravity, before being thrown effortlessly into a neighboring hab block. The crash shook the earth, a vibration that rattled Jackson's teeth. This wasn't warfare, it was humiliation. "Physics failure detected," the driver whispered, staring at the hull. The armor plating of the tank next to them, steel faithful, began to groan. Jackson watched in horror through the side viewport. There was no projectile, no melt-a-beam. The tank was simply imploding. The adamantium hull crumpled inward as if crushed by a giant invisible fist. The scream of twisting metal was deafening, drowned out only by the wet crunch of the crew inside being compressed along with their machine. Blood squeezed out of the viewing slits like juice from a press. Vecna was not just destroying them, he was dismantling them with his mind. He was picking them apart, tank by tank, with a surgical, sadistic precision. Jackson realized the terrifying truth. The enemy wasn't fighting a battle. He was playing with his food. Then the silence came again, the ticking clock. It bypassed the noise of the battlefield. Jackson blinked, and suddenly he wasn't in the tank anymore. He was back on Cadia, moments before the fall. He saw his sister, her face melting, asking why he had left her behind. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, the control yoke forgotten. "I'm sorry," he wept. Around him, the entire regiment was falling apart. Over the Voxnet, the discipline of the Cadian Guard shattered. Men weren't screaming about the enemy. They were screaming names of dead wives, lost children, and forgotten crimes. Commissar Holt, perched in the cupola of the command tank, drew his bolt pistol to execute a fleeing driver, but froze. The commissar lowered the gun to his own temple, his eyes wide with a vision of his own failures. Vecna was weaponizing their trauma. The hammer of the Emperor had not been broken by force, it had been broken by guilt. But the galaxy is crowded with horrors, and despair has a scent. As the Cadian line collapsed, the mud beneath the tanks began to bubble with a new, distinct foulness. The stench of ozone and ash was replaced by the smell of bursting abscesses and rot. From the sludge, rusted bells began to toll, a deeper, wetter sound than Vecna's clock. A tear in the warp opened, but it wasn't the clean red slice of the upside down. It was a gaping, infected maw. "Grandfather Nurgle loves you," gurgled a voice from the mire. Plague bearers, dripping with slime and counting tally books, pulled themselves out of the earth. They had been drawn by the exquisite misery Vecna was inflicting. Suddenly, the battlefield was a three-way slaughter. The upside-down vines lashed out at the Nurgle demons. The demons laughed and vomited corrosive bile onto the vines. Vecna's order was met with Nurgle's entropy. Jackson, snapping out of his trance, racked the charging handle of his bolter. The world had gone mad. If they were going to die, they would die fighting two hells at once.
The atmosphere above the Nurgle-infested battlefield did not split with the crude roar of drop pods. Instead, it shattered with the sound of a thunderclap trapped inside a cathedral bell. The air ionized instantly, smelling of ozone and burning incense, purifying the stench of rot and ash. In a flash of blinding blue light, reality was overwritten. Teleportarium flares erupted in the center of the kill zone, and from the brilliance stepped the giants of Titan. Squad Castile of the Grey Knights, clad in Indomitus pattern Terminator armor, materialized amidst the sludge. Their silver plate gleamed with an inner light, etched with microscopic runes of warding that hurt the eyes of the daemons scrambling nearby. Justicar Alaric hit the ground with the weight of a tank, his stormbolter already singing the song of the Emperor's wrath. Blam! 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 The explosive rounds, tipped with consecrated mercury and psi-charged salts, tore through the Nurgle plague-bearers, blowing them back into the warp. But Alaric's helmet display didn't highlight the daemons. His threat auspex was locked on the red static filling the air. "Brothers," Alaric's voice boomed over the Vox, calm and absolute. "The warp is wrong here. Maintain the Aegis. We face a shadow that casts no reflection." Vecna felt them arrive. For the first time since breaching this universe, the Lich felt a sensation akin to burning. He reached out with his mind, intending to snap the necks of these new interlopers just as he had crushed the mortal soldiers. He sought the cracks in their armor, the trauma, the guilt, the fear. He found nothing. The minds of the Grey Knights were not open doors. They were fortresses of adamantine will, psycho-conditioned to be impenetrable. When Vecna's telepathic tendrils struck Alaric's mind, they didn't sink in. They recoiled, burned by the psychic feedback of the Aegis. The 666th chapter was the anathema to the warp, living weapons forged from the Emperor's own gene seed. "Curious," the voice of Vecna echoed in the physical air, sounding irritated rather than triumphant. "You are hollowed out. You have no self. You are merely extensions of another's will, a hive mind of silver." Alaric didn't respond to the taunt. He simply revved his nemesis force halberd, the blade crackling with lethal blue lightning. "We are the hammer," Alaric intoned, "and you are the nail." The battle was joined. The vines of the Upside Down, which had easily pierced the ceramite of the regular Space Marines, lashed out at the Terminators. But as the fleshy tendrils touched the silver armor, they hissed and withered, repelled by the sanctified wards. Alaric swung his halberd in a wide, fluid arc. The power field of the weapon didn't just cut matter, it severed the psychic bonds holding the matter together. The vines fell apart into gray ash. To his left, Brother Boreas unleashed a stream of promethium from his incinerator, not normal fire, but blue psychic flame that burned the soul as well as the flesh. The red storm of spores shrieked as it burned. Vecna, realizing his biological weapons were ineffective, shifted tactics. He gathered the debris of the battlefield, wrecked Leman Russ tanks, concrete slabs, daemon corpses, and hurled them with telekinetic force that would have leveled a building. The debris slammed into the Terminators, staggering them, cracking shoulder pads, but they did not fall. They braced against the telekinetic hurricane, marching forward with the inevitability of a glacier.
Alaric pressed forward, stepping on the dissolving skull of a plague-bearer, his eyes fixed on the central rift where the presence was strongest. He raised his hand, channeling the psychic might of his squad into a vortex of doom. "By the golden throne I abjure thee," he roared. A sphere of pure, warp-banishing energy erupted from his palm, flying toward the rift. Vecna caught the sphere. In a display of raw power that stunned even the Justicar, the entity caught the psychic attack in mid-air with an invisible hand. The blue sphere hovered, trembling, caught between the Emperor's light and Vecna's cold void. "You pray to a corpse on a chair," Vecna sneered, the sound vibrating the very armor of the knights. "I have walked the spaces between dimensions. I have conquered death. Your god is a battery, and I am here to unplug it." With a flick of his will, Vecna crushed the vortex sphere, causing a shockwave that flattened the surrounding ruins and stripped the paint from the Grey Knight's armor. The stalemate broke. Vecna realized that mental domination was impossible, so he resorted to brute destruction on a molecular level. He focused his entire will on Justicar Alaric. Alaric felt his Terminator armor, ancient tactical dreadnought armor, begin to compress. The servos whined and sparked. The internal structural supports groaned. It was like being in a trash compressor. Red blood began to leak from Alaric's nose, running down inside his helmet. The pressure was immense, threatening to pop his hearts. "Chant the Librum Sanctic," Alaric gasped over the vox. The squad began to chant in unison, a low, guttural, high Gothic prayer that harmonized their psychic signatures. The blue glow around them intensified, pushing back against the cold, red, crushing weight of Vecna's telekinesis. It was a contest of wills, the cold, solitary ego of a would-be god versus the collective, fanatical indoctrination of the Imperial's elite. The ground cracked beneath them, unable to withstand the pressure of two realities grinding against each other. For the first time, Vecna felt strain. These were not toys. These were obstacles.
From the sanctity of his mind lair, a construct of memory and malice anchored deep within the rift, Vecna observed the battlefield of Golgotha Prime. To him, the material universe of the 41st millennium was a disappointment. He had expected to find gods worthy of the title, architects of grand design. Instead, he found only gluttonous children screaming in a nursery of filth. He cast his consciousness toward the great rift, the cicatrix maledictum that split the galaxy in two. He tasted the essence of the so-called ruinous powers. Khorne was a boar, a mindless beast of repetitive violence. Nurgle was a gardener who lacked the vision to prune his own creations. Slaanesh was an addict, slave to sensation. And Tzeentch was a schemer who never intended to win, only to prolong the game. They were not rulers, they were parasites. "They scream," Vecna mused, his voice echoing in the psychic void. "They consume, but they do not build. There is no harmony in their chaos, only noise. I will bring them silence. I will bring them order." His attention snapped back to the silver-clad warriors, the Grey Knights, who were currently burning his vines with their primitive blue fire. He analyzed them with the cold detachment of a vivisectionist. They were fascinating specimens. Their minds were scrubbed clean, their individuality cauterized and replaced with a singular, fanatical directive. He could not find the trauma he usually exploited, no repressed memories of abuse, no hidden guilt. They were hollow vessels filled with the psychic echo of a dying emperor. "You are not men," Vecna whispered, his telepathic voice sliding over the Justicar's psychic shields like oil over glass. "You are tools, blunt instruments, and tools can be broken." He realized that to break them he could not use fear, he had to use weight. He needed a physical anchor. His current form was a projection, a shadow cast from the upside down. To truly dismantle this Imperium, he required a host, not a fragile human body, but something bred for war. He looked at the Justicar, then at the sorcerer of Nurgle dying in the mud. No, he needed something more ancient.
Vecna extended his will, not outward to destroy, but inward to create. He began the rite of the chrysalis, using the millions of deaths occurring across the Hive City as fuel. He didn't feed the energy to the warp, he siphoned it. He wove the psychic screams of the dying into a lattice, pulling the fabric of the Upside Down deeper into the Immaterium. The rift above the city stopped pulsating and solidified. The red lightning changed frequency, synchronizing with the heartbeat of the planet. He was not just opening a door, he was merging the dimensions. The laws of physics in Sector 7G began to rewrite themselves. Gravity became subjective, time began to loop. The Grey Knights found their bolter rounds freezing in midair, then reversing. Vecna was creating a pocket dimension of absolute control, a domain where his will was the only law of nature. "Welcome to my world," he intoned. "Here, time does not heal, it rots." A disruption occurred. A demon prince of Nurgle, a bloated winged monstrosity named Festus the Leaking, lumbered through the smoke, annoyed that his plague garden was being overwritten by Vecna's sterile ash. The demon prince raised a rusted scythe the size of a tank, roaring a challenge in the bubbling tongue of the plague god. Vecna did not turn. He simply looked at the creature. In the 40K universe, demons are beings of emotion and symbolism. They are sustained by belief. Vecna attacked the concept of the demon itself. He invaded the demon prince's mind, a chaotic swirl of rot and joy, and injected a single virulent thought: sterility. He imposed the concept of absolute cleanliness upon a creature of filth. The demon prince stopped, confused. Then it began to scream as its very essence unraveled. The rot dried up, the flies fell dead, the bloating reversed, imploding the creature into a dry, dusty husk. Vecna floated past the crumbling remains, his point proven. Chaos relied on belief, Vecna relied on fact, and the fact was he was superior. But in his arrogance, Henry Creel made the classic mistake of the finite mind trying to comprehend the infinite. As he stood atop the spire of his mind palace, looking up at the swirling madness of the warp, he issued a challenge. He projected his thoughts into the Empyrean, a declaration of intent to the Pantheon. "Your great game is over. I am the end game." For a moment, there was silence. Then the warp shifted. It wasn't fear he felt from the dark beyond. It was amusement. A billion eyes opened in the nebula above. A laughter that sounded like glass breaking echoed across the galaxy. The shadows of the Chaos Gods did not shrink, they leaned in. Vecna felt a sudden crushing realization of scale. He was a spider who had spun a web in the corner of a room, only to realize the room belonged to giants who'd been asleep. And now the architect of fate, Tzeentch, reached down to move his newest pawn. Deep within the impossible fortress, at the center of the crystal labyrinth where the laws of physics go to die, Kairos Fateweaver perched upon a spire of solidified screams. The Oracle of Tzeentch, the two-headed Daemon Lord, did not view time as a line, but as a fracturing kaleidoscope. With his right head, he saw the future, a tapestry of infinite betrayals. With his left, he saw the past, a monument to regret. But today, both heads were locked on a singular, irritating static in the present. The great game, the eternal war between the Chaos Gods, was a symphony of glorious madness. But this new entity, this Vecna, was playing a single, monotonous note. He was trying to impose stasis upon the warp. To Tzeentch, the changer of ways, stasis was the only true sin. "He seeks to freeze the water," croaked the left head, its beak dripping with liquid light. "He seeks to stop the wheel," hissed the right head, eyes burning with prismatic fire. The architect of fate was not threatened by Vecna's power. Raw telekinesis was a parlor trick to a god, but he was offended by Vecna's ambition. It was a crude, mortal sort of ambition. It lacked nuance. It lacked style. Tzeentch did not send a horde. Hordes were for the blood god. Tzeentch sent a riddle wrapped in power armor. On the battlefield of Golgotha Prime, the air suddenly smelled of ozone and ancient papyrus. The gray ash of the Upside Down swirled and parted, not by wind, but by the unfolding of geometrical impossibilities. 9 portals opened, not tears in reality, but perfect circles of shimmering mirrored glass. From them stepped the 1,000 suns. They did not march, they simply ceased to be in one location and began to be in another. The rubric marines, the ghostly automatons of the 15th Legion, stood in silent ranks, their ornate blue and gold armor gleaming under the red storm. At their head floated exalted sorcerer Ozhek, a minor acolyte of Ahriman, his staff topped with the symbol of the Ouroboros. He did not shout a war cry, he simply tapped his staff against the air, and the reality around Vecna fractured like a dropped mirror. The order Vecna had established, the gravity, the time loops, shattered instantly, replaced by the capricious, mutating logic of the warp. Vecna, hovering above the ruins, felt a spike of genuine confusion. He reached out with his mind to seize the newcomers, intending to use his signature method: find the trauma, exploit the fear, snap the bones. He focused his telekinesis on the leading rubric marine, exerting enough pressure to crush a tank. The ceramite pauldron crumpled, the neck joint twisted with a shriek of metal, but there was no scream, there was no snap of bone, there was no gush of blood. Instead, a dry green dust poured from the breach in the armor, hissing as it hit the ground. Vecna probed for a mind to flay, but he found nothing. No ego, no fear, no soul, just a hollow echo of a spell cast 10,000 years ago. All is dust, the voice drifted on the wind, a whisper from 1,000 dead throats. For the first time, the predator had encountered prey that could not be hunted. He could not torture them, for they felt no pain. He could not kill them, for they were already dead. Interesting, the exalted sorcerer intoned, his voice a harmonious chord of 3 distinct pitches. You wield the mind as a hammer. How primitive. The sorcerer raised a hand and the atmosphere ignited. This was not the biological telekinesis of the Upside Down. This was warp sorcery, the manipulation of the raw stuff of creation. Streams of pink and blue fire, the fire of Tzeentch, erupted, bypassing Vecna's physical shields to burn his astral form. Vecna shrieked, a sound of psychic feedback, as the flames mutated the very air around him. He lashed back, throwing a wave of pure kinetic force that flattened a city block. The sorcerer didn't block it, he simply folded space, stepping sideways into a dimension that existed only for a nanosecond, letting the attack pass harmlessly through where he had been. The battlefield became a surrealist nightmare. Gravity inverted, causing tanks to fall upward into the sky. Staircases made of crystal spiraled out of the mud. Vecna's order was being dissolved by the weaponized insanity of the Changer of Ways. Desperate, Henry Creel pushed his power to the absolute limit. He tried to expand the gate, to pull the entire Upside Down into the Immaterium to drown out this sorcery. He looked past the sorcerer, gazing directly into the rift the 1,000 suns had opened. He wanted to see the source of their power. He wanted to challenge their master. And for one terrible second, the clouds of the warp parted, and Vecna saw it. He saw the infinite complexity of the great ocean. He felt the weight of a galaxy's worth of emotion, every lie ever told, every scheme ever hatched, spanning billions of years. It wasn't a mind he could invade, it was a tsunami. The sheer scale of Tzeentch's consciousness crashed against Vecna's human ego like a tidal wave hitting a sandcastle. He realized, with a horror that transcended physical fear, that he was not a god. He was a glitch in a system so vast he couldn't even perceive its edges. His nose began to bleed, not from effort, but because his brain was trying to comprehend a logic that had too many angles. In the distance, the clock chimed, but the hands were spinning backwards.
High above the stratospheric clouds, on the bridge of the inquisitorial black ship Sword of Truth, Lord Inquisitor Vane watched the hololith with a grim finality. The tactical plot of Golgotha Prime was awash of error runes and necrotic corruption. The gray rot of the Upside Down had merged with the kaleidoscopic madness of the warp, creating a tumor on the face of the planet that no amount of bolter fire could excise. "The world is lost," Vane whispered, his hand hovering over the exterminatus key. "Prepare the cyclonic torpedoes. We burn the garden to kill the weed." But on the surface, the Emperor's own judgment had already arrived. The ground shook, not with the tremor of an earthquake, but with the rhythmic, hydraulic footfalls of a god. Princeps Majoris Hecaton, floating in the amniotic tank of the warlord titan Ignis Dei, felt the reactor's heart beating in sync with his own. He was 80 meters of adamantium, ceramite, and hatred. Through the mind impulse unit, he felt the pain of the planet as if it were his own skin being flayed. The machine spirit of the Titan growled, a low, animalistic rumble of nuclear fury. It demanded blood. It demanded to meet the challenger. Vecna, battered by the sorcery of Tzeentch and the holy fire of the Grey Knights, realized his human scale was insufficient. The Warhammer universe did not respect the subtle, it respected the gargantuan. He needed a vessel that could rival the mountains. He reached out with his mind, seizing the wreckage of the entire Hive City. Thousands of tons of twisted plasteel, the corpses of millions of citizens, the burning chassis of lemon rust tanks, and the very bedrock of the planet were pulled into a swirling vortex. In the center of the ruins, a form began to rise. It was a titan of flesh and debris, a macroscopic reconstruction of his own flayed form. It stood equal in height to the Ignis Dei, a skeletal nightmare held together by red lightning and telekinetic will. Its eyes were burning void pits, and its hands were claws made of skyscraper support beams. The air screamed as the atmosphere was displaced by its sheer mass. The Lich had become a kaiju. He roared, a sound that shattered every window within 50 kilometers, and the red storm overhead bowed to his command. "Engine kill," Hecaton commanded, his thought flashing through the neural link at the speed of light. The warlord titan's void shields flared into existence, shifting the air into a shimmering haze of displacement. The Vecna construct lunged, its massive debris arm swinging with the force of a meteor. Crack! The impact against the void shield sounded like the breaking of a world. The shields held, but the feedback sent a shockwave through the amniotic tank, causing Hecaton's nose to bleed. The Titan staggered back, crushing a city block beneath its heel. Vecna did not let up. He focused his telekinesis not on the armor, but on the reactor core itself, trying to pinch the magnetic containment field shut. Warning klaxons blared inside the cockpit. "He is in the code," the Moderati screamed. "He is trying to choke the machine spirit." Hecaton grit his teeth, forcing his will against the alien intruder. "This machine answers to the Omnissiah alone," he roared. The Titan raised his right arm, the Sun Fury plasma annihilator whining as it charged to critical mass. The battlefield was bathed in the light of a second sun. The plasma annihilator unleashed a stream of superheated matter, blue-white and blinding. It struck the Vecna construct in the chest. The debris armor vaporized instantly. Concrete turned to glass, steel turned to gas. The beam punched a hole through the giant entity, burning away the red vines that held it together. But Vecna screamed in defiance, using the pain to fuel his power. He began to knit the hole shut, pulling more debris into himself. Hecaton realized that destruction was not enough. He needed erasure. "Unlock the Bellicosa," the Princeps ordered. The warlord's carapace weapons, Apocalypse missile launchers, fired a barrage to suppress the enemy, blinding Vecna in a cloud of explosions. Then the primary weapon leveled. The Bellicosa volcano cannon, a weapon capable of coring a tectonic plate, hummed with a sound that vibrated the marrow of every living thing on the continent. "For the Emperor," Hecaton whispered. The beam fired. It was not a laser. It was a coherent spear of pure destruction. It hit the central rift behind Vecna, the anchor point of his power. The impact was silent, for the energy was so intense it burned the air before sound could travel. The rift to the Upside Down destabilized. The connection was severed. Deprived of his infinite energy source, the giant Vecna construct crumbled.
Gravity reasserted its hold. The mountain of debris collapsed, burying the hive city in a tomb of rubble. But on his augurs, Hecaton saw the truth. The corruption had gone too deep. The planet's core was infected. The Ignis Dei sounded its war horn one last time, a mournful, victorious cry. High above, the Sword of Truth released the cyclonic torpedoes. They trailed fire as they fell, burrowing deep into the planet's crust before detonating. The crust cracked. Magma bled out into the oceans, boiling them instantly. From the cockpit of his god machine, Hecaton watched the horizon ignite. He did not retreat. The Titan Legion stood vigil as the world died around them, the ultimate sacrifice to ensure the shadow did not spread. The clock had stopped ticking. The silence of the grave had finally arrived.
The planet Golgotha Prime was no longer a world. It was a debris field of cooling magma and shattered tectonic plates drifting aimlessly in the void. In the silence of the vacuum, where sound cannot carry, a consciousness floated. Henry Creel, Vecna, was stripped of his physical form. The Titan construct had been vaporized, and the gate to the Upside Down had been cauterized by the Emperor's fire. He was now merely a drift of psychic ash, a ghost in the machine of the universe. For the first time since his transformation, he felt small. He tried to reach out, to find a mind to latch onto, to weave his web again, but there was nothing but the cold radiation of deep space and the distant mocking laughter of the warp. He was adrift in the currents of the Empyrean, bleeding energy, slowly dissolving into the background noise of the galaxy. He had sought to bring order to chaos, but here, in the aftermath of Exterminatus, there was only the absolute zero of entropy. He realized, with a sinking dread, that he was not the predator of this dimension. He was merely an invasive species that had been fumigated. A ripple disturbed the vacuum. It was not the organic tear of a warp rift, nor the crude combustion of Imperial engines. It was a smooth, silent displacement of reality. A crescendo of emerald light pierced the darkness, illuminating the floating rocks. From the green haze emerged a vessel of sleek crescent geometry, a night scythe of the Necron dynasties. Standing atop a command barge that glided effortlessly through the void was a figure of living metal. Tzeentch the Infinite, overlord of Slaanesh, leaned on his empathic obliterator staff, his ocular sensors whirring as they zoomed in on the psychic residue of the anomaly. He did not look like a warrior coming to finish a fight. He looked like a curator inspecting a smudge on a painting. Fascinating, Tzeentch's voice transmitted directly into the ether, bypassing the need for air. A gestalt consciousness based on fungal networks and nostalgia. How quaint. You are not of this galaxy, creature. You smell of a timeline that never was. Vecna lashed out. Even in his diminished state, his ego was a weapon. He focused his remaining will into a psychic spear, aiming to pierce the Necron's mind, to find the trauma of the biotransference, the horror of losing a soul. He slammed against Tzeentch's mental defenses, but he found no soft meat, no fearful memories. He struck a wall of engrammatic algorithms and hard light encryption. Tzeentch's mind was a fortress of cold data, honed over 60 million years. The Necron overlord simply flicked a finger, and a mind shackle scarab detached from his barge, latching onto the psychic energy of Vecna. "Do not be rude," Tzeentch chided, sounding bored. "I have imprisoned gods of the stars and fragments of the Cetan. Do you truly think a human psyche mutated by a pocket dimension poses a threat to me? Your ambition exceeds your voltage." Tzeentch produced a small, intricate cube from his dimensional pocket, a tesseract labyrinth. The device hummed, its internal geometry shifting in ways that hurt to look at. "You are a singularity," Tzeentch continued, manipulating the controls of the lemon rust-sized barge to bring him closer to the drifting spirit. "Unique specimen. The Chaos Gods would only eat you, and the Imperium has already tried to burn you. A waste of history."
The tesseract flared. Beams of green Gauss energy shot out, wrapping around the red, smoky essence of Vecna. It wasn't painful in a physical sense. It was an ontological violation. Vecna felt his very definition being rewritten. The vastness of his mind, the connection to the hive mind, the grand clock tower, it was all being compressed. The red lightning of the Upside Down fought against the emerald lightning of the Necrons, a clash of two distinct physics. But the Necron technology was older than humanity, older than the concept of the Upside Down. It was absolute. Vecna screamed, a soundless psychic wail as he was pulled toward the aperture. He saw the stars stretching, the debris field shrinking. He was being digitized, folded, and archived. Location? Sullinan's Galleries, the prismatic hall of forgotten nightmares. Silence returned. Tzeentch walked through the vast echoing halls of his museum, the sound of his metal feet clicking against the black stone floor. He paused before a new display, bathed in a stasis field of hard light. Inside the display was a perfect diorama, a frozen slice of the Upside Down. There, trapped in a single moment of time, stood Vecna. He was posed in mid-spell, hand outstretched, surrounded by red vines and spores that would never fall. He looked powerful, terrifying, and utterly helpless. Tzeentch dusted an invisible speck of dust from the glass. He read the plaque he had just engraved. Subject: The Lich of Hawkins. Origin: Terra M2, alternate reality. Note: attempted to usurp the Great Game. Failed due to lack of heavy artillery. Tzeentch chuckled, a dry metallic rasp, and turned to walk away, the lights dimming behind him. In the dark, Vecna's eyes remained open, staring at a wall he could not break, trapped forever in a collection of monsters, just another trophy in a universe that had no room for new gods.